Okay, everybody, let's get started. Welcome, welcome. I am Jeremy.
Happy birthday!
Thank you. It is my birthday. Slurpees for all. It's one of my political planks, and I'm the co-chair also of NYC-DSA, and deeply involved in our political education work. A little bit about, well, first of all, I hear that there are some new people in the room whose maybe first meeting this is. If that's you, raise your hand because, hi, welcome. Welcome. So just to say a little bit about NYC-DSA. NYC-DSA is the largest chapter of the largest socialist political organization in about 100 years of US history. We have 10 elected representatives in New York alone, and we are working to build a deep movement in labor, in housing, in every area where ordinary people are struggling against the ultra-wealthy to create a real democracy. So that's NYC-DSA. We have about 6,000 members in New York City, so welcome to our new people. And if you aren't a member yet, you'll get a pitch at the end. So that's NYC-DSA, political education.
I mean, there's already a request to speak a little more slowly if you can. There's a little bit of that.
No, I too. All right. Really bring out my Shakespeare. Political education, part of what we do is we do a lot of active work in NYC-DSA. We are building, a whole chunk of our politics, maybe the main point of our politics is to talk to people who don't already agree with us about our politics, about what we believe in, and to organize those people. That said, in order to do that as effectively as possible, we believe in being smart socialists. We believe in studying the traditions of our movement, in clarifying our values and what we stand for, in thinking about our strategy and how we hope to achieve actual transformation in the world. So that's some of why we come together in political education, and we do a whole number of different series. And I'm really excited to introduce I came here on my birthday because I'm so excited to introduce, in fact. Thank you. I'm so excited to introduce a seminar this summer that is going to work, we hope, in deep tandem relationship with our Union Power campaign, which you'll hear a little bit more about at the end of this session, where we're doing our utmost to build the labor movement in a key time where the labor movement is kicking off and transforming and re-energizing and accomplishing things all over the country. So to understand better the history of labor in the United States, the politicization of the labor question, we're really honored to have to lead this 7th session seminar, Dr. Steve Fraser, who let's all give a hand. Germans say have Professor, but you can call him Steve. Also, I've had the privilege of knowing Steve now for a number of years. We reminisced about when we first met, maybe like 10 years ago, I'd say. But Steve is an eminent historian, emeritus at Columbia. He has published a number of super interesting books, including a cultural history of Wall Street, which I recommend to your attention. And his most recent book, I wrote down the title because otherwise I knew I would not remember it. Also the book that we'll read some sections of for this class, The Age of Acquiescence. And the most recent book is Mongrel Firebugs and Men of Property, Capitalism and Class Conflict in American History. So Steve is a historian who's going to take us really through a sweeping analysis of labor throughout the history of this country, the politicization of labor, the organization of labor, and the depoliticization and disorganization of labor trends that we as NYC-DSA are trying to overcome, and so that we should understand as best we can. So with that, I will take my seat. Again, welcome to you all, and let's give one more welcome to our professor.
Thanks everybody for coming out. It's hot, so I appreciate your interest. I'm going to do something a little maybe out of the ordinary. It's okay to do. Normally, I guess, we would sort of all introduce ourselves, and I do want to do that because I would like to learn stuff about you, and you may want to learn something about me. But before I do that, because I think it'll be more interesting after I do what I'm about to do, I'd like to talk a little bit about the main themes and kind of objectives of the course, which may prompt you to read Think again or provoke questions and comments when it's your turn to talk a little bit. I should say the architecture of this room is not conducive to discussion, but I do hope that that's what this course is mainly going to do. A lot of talk among all of this little lecture about it. Anyway, so this is not a course in the history of the labor movement. We will naturally read and talk about the labor movement and its history, but it's a course about the labor question and its history, which is a bigger deal. The labor movement, without a labor movement, there would be no labor question. But the labor question interrogates the whole of society. It interrogates capitalism. It's been asked by everybody. Ruling elites, clergymen, novelists, middle-class folk, reformers, revolutionaries, socialists, populists. Everybody has been troubled until more recently with that question. The four great political moments in American political history, a country which otherwise has a rather placid political history, are all informed by the labor question, but not perhaps in the way we're used to formulate it. The revolution, the American Revolution, is informed by a version of the labor question which it aborts. The Civil War, self-evidently, is motivated by a labor question of slavery. The greatest mass political movement in the country, which actually portended substantial change and failed, populism, is about the labor question as it was phrased in late 19th century America. We'll get to that. The New Deal, the other great transformation of American political life, is addressed to the labor question and performs a kind of alchemy on that question, addresses it and domesticates, diluting some of its revolutionary impulse. So, not the labor movement, even though we're going to talk a lot about the labor movement. We're going to talk about, as Jeremy already alluded to, the rise and fall and perhaps the reemergence of the labor question. Why did it rise? What were its various motivations? From what parts of the population did it rise? That's not self-evident. It's not only working class people who raised that question or who mobilized behind it. And the question, it's a story. Why did it fall? What's the narrative? What led to its diminishing, its eclipse by other issues? And is it rising again? Can it ever rise again in the way it once did? Can it ever elicit the passions it once elicited throughout 75 years of American history? Or are we living in a new age where that kind of question will never engender that kind of passion and sense of imminent transcendence to question the course? We're going to look at a question which has been asked 1,000 times and will keep getting asked until we answer it, which is why you're in this room now. Why no socialism in America? The question was originally, I guess, formulated by a German sociologist, Werner Sombart, in the early 20th century, and many people, radical movements, scholars, others have wrestled with that question, and we're going to wrestle with it through the whole course. Why no socialism in America? And I always combine that question with another. Why no socialism yet enormous anti-capitalism? How is that possible? What made that possible? And what does it tell us about the story of the labor question in America? Because we're wrestling with that question, we're going to ask something much more fundamental and existential in this course, I hope. None of these things, we'll answer all these questions by the end, like I told you. But no, I can't, these are tough questions, but I want us to deal with them. Whenever I taught, I haven't taught a lot, I've taught. And I always say there are two great mysteries about social history. One is, why do people, ordinary people, put up with what they put up with? The oppressions, the exploitation, the indignities, the dependencies, the humiliation. Why did they ever put up with that? And the other question is, why do they ever revolt? Because it's so dangerous and risky to do so. And it happens rarely. So when does it happen? And what is happening while that's not happening? What are the sources of that acquiescence, so to speak? So of course we'll try to deal with that. In talking about revolt and submission, we talk about a question which is close to our organization's part. What is the relationship between the minority of radicals and revolutionaries and democracy? We are democratic socialists, so we believe in democracy. And that may seem a self-evident, self-explanatory issue. It's not. Democracy can take many, many forms, some of them quite abhorrent, quite repulsive, but still a majority can rule. So, and revolutions happen, or even great mass movements happen, often because of the role of minorities. So how do we negotiate that relationship? What do we make it? The course will explore that issue over 5 eras. The first, not counting tonight. The first is the Gilded Age, when a labor question animates the period, but one we're not familiar with, not totally. When the labor question is in a period of transition from something that is pretty alien to the way the lives of society we know. Society of smallholders, farmers, properties, small craftsmen, and it is evolving into a society dominated by wage labor. And the second era we'll talk about is the golden age of socialism in this country. That is the century, first 2 decades of the 20th century. When the Socialist Party we're heirs to has its greatest traction in American life. The third is the New Deal and how the New Deal manages that transformation from a kind of revolutionary moment, which inherits, in my view, and does something to it that turns it into, normalizes it. The fourth era is the one that talks about the decline, the eclipse, the dying away of the labor question as the primordial social question facing America. And believe me, everybody believed that for a long time. I've written a million essays with the opening line, Woodrow Wilson cabled Congress from Versailles in 1919, and I can't remember the quote, but but this is roughly it. The overarching question facing the world is the labor question. This was not something that only radicals believed. The whole society was troubled by it. And then we're going to talk about, obviously, today, the recent past. That's the last era. Say, from the Great Recession forward, what's changing? Where is it going? Where's life going? In doing that, I hope the whole course will stress the importance of us being historically minded to be good revolutionaries. You have to know where you're coming from, what you're inheriting, in order to move forward. And maybe that's just a platitude, but it really true. I have 2 things. There are 2 quotes that reminded of me. One, William Faulkner's thing about the past is not dead, it's not even past. And that is, we're like little molecules of history colliding again. That's all we really are. That's what we are. Individually, collectively, we carry that with us. And we're living in the perpetual past, even as we move into the present. But the other, and this is something we need to be, I'm especially conscious of, comes kind of from Harold Pinter, the British playwright, although I think he borrowed it from the novel. And he said this: the past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. And I think that's very important so that we don't condescend. Don't think that we have this kind of super knowledge our ancestors didn't have. And I think there's a tendency in left circles to adopt that attitude, something I think I want to remind us not to, because I want the course to be relevant at every juncture to now. And we will ask questions about what does primitive accumulation in the 17th century have to do with now. We will do that. But we need to do that with that in mind, and it's different. It's a different place, it's a different country. And finally, in that same way, in struggling to respect the past, it's important that we acknowledge what Jack London called the abyss. That is to say, this is a sensitive subject. Society is very complicated. Oppression, exploitation, denigration, they are very harsh ways to live. They don't automatically produce virtue. All kinds of things happen as a result of that, and we're going to deal with that. Why some people in what might seem a revolutionary situation act as scales, why they evince racial attitudes and biases and so on. The abyss, I think it's in the Iron Heel that line. Doug, you would know. You don't know. Anyway, Doug is not as old as I am, but I figured he's tall, so he might know. Anyway, so that's it. Okay, now, so that's that. That was the big themes of the course as a whole. So what I'd like to do now is, if I could, let everybody say briefly who you are, why you're taking the course, and if you have questions or comments about what I just ran through, do that. And the other thing that would be a big help to me is to very briefly tell me what you already, how knowledgeable you are about American history, labor history, left history, so I get a sense of the room. And I guess I should say that people on Zoom can do this via the chat, right? Okay, there are a lot of people on Zoom. So we can start. I do me. Should I do me? Okay. So as Jeremy said, I've been an activist my whole life, political activist on a lot of different things: civil rights, anti-war, left sectarianism. You know, you name it, I did it. And I've also been a scholar and writer. And an editor, an editor for a long time, and I've taught, thank God, I guess, a little bit here and there. And I'm here because I believe in socialist revolution.
Right, just you or?
My
my name's Carrington. I'm with DSA for publication. And I guess the more I learn of history, the more I realize I don't know about history. So it makes me want to learn more and more. It's and I find it very rewarding in forming an analysis of how we can approach our moment.
You already heard from me. I'm Jeremy. I guess in terms of my own background, like a lot of socialists who were educated before the last like 5 or so years, I learned a hell of a lot more about European and Russian history than I learned about American. So I know my way around, but definitely part of my like political awakening around Bernie Sanders was like, oh, America, this place I've been trying to organize in or thought of myself as being in for a long time. How interesting. I better learn more. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the class.
Sure. My name's Sophie.
Sophie.
That's right.
Oh,
Most of my historical labor knowledge was kind of confined to the legal sphere. Just graduated from law school. But I think I was kind of most compelled by the like majoritarian democracy question that you raised. So I think about that.
Hi everyone, I'm Daniel. Just moved to New York, first NYC-DSA meeting. So
Yay.
welcome, thank you. I think I came to sort of socialist politics and historical questions together. I'm a PhD student now studying American history and labor history in the early 20th century, and have organized in unions and the labor movement before coming back to academia. So I'm a great admirer of Steve from afar, and was very excited to put a toe into political education here in New York.
My name is Micah. I am a magazine editor. I publish a lot about labor movements. I've written a bunch about the labor movement, studied it in grad school. I was been Steve's editor, although Steve doesn't need much editing. Yeah, I'm obsessed with labor, so I always want to know more about the labor.
Yeah, hi Jesse. I have like a very idiosyncratic path to the left that's mostly focused on like very standard like historical narratives, which tend to not talk very much about labor. So despite like being relatively well read on like general history, I know frighteningly little about like what's actually happened with the past with workers. So very excited.
I'm Doug. I'm a journalist. I write and broadcast about economics and politics mostly. No reasonable amount of history, but there's a whole lot more to learn.
My name is Kalika. I am, I hate when everyone's looking at me, but I'm on New York City's steering committee. I do bonds along with like Jeremy and some other people for the new folks. That's like our citywide leadership body. I've been having a lot of questions, like conversations about strategy and like how to democracy and things like that. I'm also an organizer, and I think that my preoccupation also is always how to like communicate issues both to our membership and like to a wider audience when we're talking about things. At work, we just had a presentation where I organized professional workers, and professional workers said that 2/3 of professional workers don't know anything about unions, and only 1/4 have like a vague to good understanding of what a union is. So I thought that was interesting. Also, more women care about unions than men, even though that isn't reflected in our labor or leadership. So that's kind of me. And I think that I'm really excited for everything. I really think that preoccupation with that question about the democracy and minorityism will be like very interesting.
I'm Rebecca. I don't know a lot about history of labor. So that's why I'm here.
Also, Rebecca does a lot of union power stuff. She'll talk about that later. So you should come talk to her if you're interested. Or meeting for Jeremy. The other people here.
Hi, I'm John. I work in the music industry. I like to get out and be sort of on picket lines and support the various labor actions, and just got started in some union power stuff here in New York. I'm relatively new to town. I you know, along the lines of the question of this course, right? The labor question, and why is it not central like it used to be? I'm often baffled by that. You know, I'm surrounded by, you know, so-called progressives of the professional managerial class, and it just seems to me a real tipping point. You know, the labor and class. Like, for me, it's like so many people just don't seem to be energized by it or even care about it, and it's like, why? What is all this socialism? Why should I care? You know, that's why I'm curious. I always want to learn more about the labor movement and labor questions. So, thank you for being here. Thank you for organizing this.
Hi everyone, my name is Hank. I'm a software engineer, and I would like to organize my workplace. And so part of that is to learn like the labor history, you know, like what I'm inheriting and stuff like that, and to basically learn better strategies and tactics to organize. and understand why tech workers are not organized themselves, even though there's a lot of progressives in there in the movement or in the among our ranks too. So
Hi, I'm Ethan. I don't know much about labor or history in general, so here to learn more. But I feel like in terms of background why I'm interested in this is I've done a lot of like volunteer work in the past and charity work, and I've seen that like a lot of struggles in general are class based, and so I want to get more involved and learn more. So I don't know, just get more educated. But yeah.
I'm Rodney. I'm the membership coordinator for the chapter, and my understanding of labor history is very basic, and let alone the labor question, not at all. I would say the labor movement I'm most familiar with is from the 1992 classic Disney musical, The Newsies. So I have a lot to learn.
Hey everyone, my name is Greg. I work as a doctor in the city hospitals. I studied some history, but not nearly enough in college, which was some time ago. I'm very interested in the labor question, not only for current activism around healthcare activism, single payer, but also to understand how the labor question also relates to struggles for health, healthcare, and how that's looked in different periods of American history.
Hi, my name is Adam. I'm a barista, and pretty much had like shitty jobs my entire life as an adult. So, I participated in workplace organizing in pretty much every job that I have had. So for me, it's a matter of like being able to contextualize whatever I'm doing and to figure out the bigger picture way. Like how can what I'm doing level wherever I work at that time to like how that's relevant to basically the larger picture of American work, how make the right decisions this time around so that we win. That's my interest in this too much. I don't know too much about the history of labor necessarily, so that's also part of it.
hi everyone, my name is Max. I'm on the organizing committee of the NYC-DSA labor branch. I've also been a union organizer. Currently, I'm a tech worker, and I'm also a student in the master's program of labor studies at CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies. And I'm here because I've studied your work at CUNY SLU, and it's always just like blown my mind, especially your writings on the New Deal. Like, not to gas you up too much, but I'm just like,
No, go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, I'm journalist and mostly cover
Talk a little louder.
sorry, I'm always cover. My name's Ashley. I'm a journalist. I cover labor and climate and social movements. Yeah, I'm very invested in the labor movement and just want to learn more.
Hi, I'm Ina. I served on a steering committee of the New York City chapter for a couple of years, and now I'm in a bit of a retirement phase politically. But like Jeremy, I had a sort of training on the left prior to 2016 boom, and so got a lot of European history and a sort of cursory understanding of American labor history, but always eager to learn more. I'm going to be in and out of the class. I'm traveling, etc. But it's really, really cool to be here, and I've been excited to do this for a while.
I'm Annie. I'm also kind of new to New York, therefore new to NYC-DSA. I'm a former grad student, did some grad labor organizing, and yeah, I feel like I know more about kind of like Marxist theory and stuff and less about the history. So I'm really excited to learn about that. And I'm also a fan of the work Steve. So just as like, could we just give a shout out to Annie because she basically organized all of this, make sure everything's in place. I am with the citywide affiliate. I also approach this from a more theoretical perspective. I'm interested in the kind of question of the body as property and how labor fits into that, like alienation of aspects of bodily property. So I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Milo. I think I probably learned more about the history of unions from that movie, The Irishman, than I ever learned in school. I don't think like anybody ever really mentioned the union in all the history class I took. It's kind of bizarre. So I'm really excited to learn more, especially given DSA's current work. You know, with union power in general, and particularly with the Teamsters at UPS. All that kind of trouble coming up. It was really inspiring to listen to some of those workers at a fundraiser that we had for them a few weeks ago. And also just on a personal note, I'm entering a grad program right now, but I also have worked on and off for many years in the restaurant industry, which I think is really interesting because it really could use work organization, but it's very, very far from getting that because a lot of people who I work with are actually pretty anti-union. And when you think about, you know, how many people who work in the industry who are undocumented immigrants who have language barriers, you know, who are basically subject to labor law violations every single day that you clock in, like you can count them just looking around a restaurant. And yet the idea of unions is sort of anathema. So I'm really interested to learn more about the history and hopefully, you know, learn more about practical application.
A cool group of people. My name is Ben. I'm also on the DSA Poly-Ed committee. I'm an art critic, so I know more about art history and labor history. Nevertheless, I'm a veteran of activism in New York and have been in many Marxist study groups. So I know more. I know some of this history, more than nothing, but definitely not as much as I'd like to.
Hi, my name is Honda. I'm a steering committee member of DSA's National Labor Commission. I'm also a city worker, shop steward in my union, DC 37, and I'm also a student at the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies. While I consider myself reasonably knowledgeable about American labor history, my studies have also revealed to me that there's so much more for me to learn. So I'm looking forward to the rest of this course.
Thank you. It's a very varied group, which is my problem. That is to say, some of you know a bit, some far less. I think the reason that a fair number of people know less is symptomatic of the vanishing away of the labor question. You don't get taught it. Why would you in a society that doesn't care about it? In any event, good. This helps me a lot, and I wanted to mention a couple of things about just sort of the protocols, the way the course is going to run. As I mentioned earlier, it's designed as a seminar. So my idea is that I begin each class with a little kind of introductory talk, maybe 20 minutes or something like that, maybe a half hour at the most, probably not like that, but try to restrain myself. And then it's discussion. But that discussion can only happen if you read. The discussion really can't be entirely, you can't hook onto my kind of introductory lecture. I've tried to, I don't know what, you're all working people, you have busy lives and so on. I don't know what this is a guess at what you might be able to handle every 2 weeks. I hope you can. But the discussion, the richness of the discussion will depend on whether or not you read. And I'm hoping that there'll be a continuity. You know, there's a lot of other things going on in life, and this may not be the course you thought it was, and so on. But I'm hoping people will come back because the big issues I raised in my opening remarks can only be fully addressed or addressed as we move through these time periods and use what we've learned in the previous session to enlighten us in the next session. one thing, a little thing. There are a fair number of my writings, so this can be a problem. And I wrestle with it. This course has a long gestation and trying to make it very compact, not too many readings. And since I'm the best labor historian alive, why not? No, the idea was to try to have you read things that were relatively short that summarize things. But this is a problem, and I don't know how to address it except to say I have. You should feel free to criticize, question, talk about the readings that include my reading. Not sensitive about mine. Everybody's sensitive about what they write, but really, it's okay to really interrogate them and question them. I don't have a problem with that. We need to do that. Okay, now we can do one of two things. Right? What I have planned, we can do this. Is I could give a brief little talk, and you could respond about what I call the prehistory of the modern labor question, which is that long 200-year period of colonial, revolutionary, and antebellum America. That's quite a chunk. And I can't obviously lecture about it, but I could highlight some things that are important that would be things that will continue to trouble us throughout the rest of the course. Or I don't know if you were sent this handout beforehand or if you just got it now with these quotes. If you're familiar with the quotes and they interest you or they provoke thoughts in you, we could just deal with those quotes and have a maybe less coherent, but maybe more interesting thing to hear me drawn on. I'm not sure really what is best. How do people feel about it?
I'm for droning.
You're for droning. I can do that.
All right, 2 draws. Anyone for what's the other Kochi? I think
okay.
You have the floor.
Yeah. Okay. So these are real highlights. One. The British Empire is a solution to an old labor question. The quotes that you first see about masterless men address that. In the 16th and 17th century, England faced a crisis as the English countryside monetized and became more and more a capitalist agrarian society. Growing numbers of people found themselves wandering the countryside, cast off the land, losing their land, couldn't even afford to be tenants anymore. They were, in the eyes of the British upper classes, the dangerous classes. They had no masters. In other words, traditional British society, like European society, is a society of steep hierarchy, ranks and orders. You defer to your superior. You're obliged in a variety of ways, even if not through feudal times. Now you're masterless. You're flooding the cities. You're desperately poor. You are committing crimes. Why wouldn't you? You have to live. You're socially disruptive. And the English ruling class, merchants, bankers, landowners, worry about that. That's why those quotes suggest that. That's why Sir Humphrey, the founder of Newfoundland, so to speak, he said, we could dump these people abroad, dump them, and not just dump them, but they're going to work for us. They're going to work for us because we're going to found what is called in academic terms, you know this phrase, a kind of settler colonialism, right? Where we're going to build a new economy that's going to enrich us. A lot of the plantations, Jamestown, Plymouth, Massachusetts, all of them are basically investment companies. They were called adventurers and really were venture capitalists with shareholders. And in order to make those investments in the new world pay off, they had to have people to work, to build a society, to build roads, to farm, to build schools, to do it all 1,001 things. if you're not a settler of colonial empire, you just need a military and a thin bureaucracy, and you loot. You don't build, you loot the natural resources, whatever they may be, like the Spanish in Latin America. You loot. But the British, we like to have done that, but there's no gold really to be had in North America that is significant. So they're going to use this new world to make money by resettling masterless men under terms of bondage. So what is happening is a kind of nascent proletariat. These masterless men are being de-proletarianized. We all know what the word proletariat means, right? We call it wage labor. We used to call it free willers back in the day, 70s, free willers. They're on their own, they work for wages at the beginning. Instead, most of these people, we're talking about 750,000 people over the course of the 17th, 18th century, 16th and 17th century, come here as indentured servants. They are bound for various terms of labor. As your quotes suggest, they are near slaves. They can be mortgaged, borrowed, used as credit, whipped. They must have passes to move outside their vicinity. Sounds a little bit like slavery, and it is in some ways. A thick code of laws governing what they can do and can't do. They can't serve on juries. They can't vote. And they're bound for various terms of labor, anywhere from 2 to 14 years. Some of them are convicts who are escaping a gallows in England. Some of them are just desperately poor people. Some are kidnapped. Some are enabled into coming, thinking, not realizing they're going to be indentured when they get here, till they're on the ship, and various planters and merchants come and survey them like they were slaves, assess their capabilities, their physical, and buy them. And in return for that purchase, they work as servants. So America is, and that's why, and the whole ideological structure of colonial America reflects that. That's why Cotton Mather can say the things he says on your quote. If you're a servant, you are basically an adjunct of your master. You are, and one of the quotes of an ordinary folk, seeing people auctioned off, indentured servants auctioned off, compares them to slaves, and to livestock, which is, of course, the status of slaves. They're breeders, they're property. The only big difference is it's not permanent. So the status of indentured servants. Okay, point 2. Colonial imperial America survives that way, and through 2 acts of primitive, what's called primitive accumulation. So one is this deproletarianization, the turning of nationalist men into bonded workers, bonded, unfree workers, but not slaves. The second is primitive accumulation, that is to say, by absorbing the resources, human and natural, of other societies. Obviously, we're talking about indigenous populations, where either by stealth or by arms, land is seized, or terms of trade are established between the colonial settlers and indigenous people for their very, very valuable resources, like fur-bearing animals. The luxury trade of 17th, long before that Europe, is the fur trade. Aristocracies in Europe, in Russia, in China buy these furs. Indigenous people in America are producing them, hunting them, and end up in this trading relationship until they're impoverished with the great merchant trading. The first millionaire in America is John Jacob Astor. John Jacob Astor makes his fortune initially in the fur trade, all over Canada and the northern United States. But long before that. So this primitive accumulation, and that goes on. We need to ask ourselves, both with respect to bonded servants, whether such an archaic system can reappear even today. We're going to think about that, not now, but we'll talk about it. So too, we're going to talk about does primitive accumulation continue today? Is it part of the art? Is it simply primitive accumulation? I'm sorry. Okay. What all it means is kind of means. It used to mean in popular parlance, the gestation of capitalism, finding its initial capital resources outside the sphere of capitalism itself in traditional societies. Or, this is the main form of primitive accumulation, slavery in the New World, where you're essentially absorbing the bodies of African societies and turning them into monetizable property and accumulating capital as a result. So the question is, can that continue to happen, or is it just stop once the initial accumulation is done? You have that pile of wealth which then goes into trade or cotton production or textile production. And I'm going to argue that primitive accumulation is an ongoing process even today, where non-market, non-capitalist resources are engorged by the capitalist market. So we'll think about that. I'll tell you one story. The cost of this, not only are indigenous people ravaged, their societies destroyed, not only slaves turned into slaves, but the workers who begin, the wage laborers who, we all know Alice in Wonderland. You know who the Mad Hatter is? The Mad Hatter, not who you think he is. No, he is, but Robert Louis Stevenson picks that character because the workers in England who worked on curing the furs and treating them and making them into beaver hats did so with a solution that included mercury, and it ate away at their brains, and there was an epidemic of mental illness among the makers of all the beaver, otter, all the different furs that were being looted, or not being traded for in the New World, produced in England. Okay. Now, here's the obverse. The empire is also the creation of a new labor question and a solution to the labor question it had invented with bonded servants. How could that be? And your quotes address that. Indentured servants. And indentured servants, at the end of the, this is significant. By the end of the 18th century, indentured servants, and this continues even past the revolution, make up about 750,000, 800,000 people. Slaves, about 300,000 to 400,000. Slavery only takes off after. So we're talking about a very sizable part of the labor force. When it gets to be free, That's the thing. The terms of service end. If while under service, you do anything to violate your terms of service, they extend the length. Okay, but your term ends, and you even are promised what we call freedom use, and sometimes that even includes land. It does, or tools, or just a suit of clothes, or the wherewithal to maybe get a job, so to speak, as an apprentice, grasping in the cities which are now growing, small towns. The prospect, that's the quote from John Smith, all the way back in the early 17th century. John Smith says, every man can be his own master. And this is a theme that's going to run through American history from that moment to this day. To this day, that dream of being self-sufficient, of being self-reliant. And it relates the labor question to property. In other words, the way to emancipate yourself from bondage or from various other forms of subordinate labor is to take advantage of, when the revolution ends, there are 500 million acres opened up to settlement, thievery, or whatever it is you're going to get, right? It's a lot. And in fact, a sizable number of people, ex-indentured servants and others acquire that land and become freeholders. And they develop an economy that sometimes by economists or other Marxists call a household economy, petty producers. They have some dealings with the market, but largely they are self-sufficient. They're not capitalist farmers, right? And this is a dream because here you are, having come from a position of bondage, subservient, you owe nothing to anybody. It's your land, and the land embodies your freedom. And that sense of emancipation will continue certainly all through the 19th century, and the defense of it, and the fear that it may be taken away from you. And labor is accorded an enormous value. None of this all we associate with the modern labor question, but as connected inextricably to self-sufficient property. And that can also apply to a master craftsman in towns and cities and so on. Household economy, and it will be always under threat from capitalist interests, merchants, financiers, land speculators, landlords. There's a gathering capitalist economy that will continually produce a threat to that dream. But I would argue that that dream will be very different from what even exists today. The revolution is this is my next point. The revolution is not a social revolution. It's an independence movement that succeeds in establishing independence. It is not a social revolution. There's no way to argue that it is, because all of the attack on hierarchy, America is a hierarchical society in colonial days. It's just not as steeply hierarchical because of the availability of land for freeholders as Britain or the old world. But it is hierarchical, and it begins to dissolve in the face of this growing freeholder world that doesn't defer anymore. That's all done, accomplished before the revolution ever happens. And it creates a tension between those freeholders and people like John Adams, who's on your sheet, or Thomas Jefferson, who are used to deferential society, expect to be deferred to. That's why Adams says, the question shall always be who shall work, because that's the great divide. Has always been time immemorial. There are those who work, they are subordinate, they are inferior, they're alive, that's their fate, and then there are those like Adams who don't. And Adams expects that society to continue, even though he's worried it may not, because the revolution breeds a kind, and that's the other quote on your sheet. It breeds a kind of restiveness and suspicion of the great wealthy elites in America on the part of freeholders and wage laborers. That's why the first wage labor has always been wage labor as an incidental, so going back forever. But by the time of the revolution in the late 18th, early 19th century, it continued to become more apparent. And among the most important wage laborers are sailors who live a miserable existence, are treated themselves almost like bound labor. It's a highly dangerous job. The captain exercises autocratic authority. Corporal punishment is part of the world they live in. And maybe because they're a transcontinental population, they're exposed to all the ideas and the view of the world and become very militant and organized. And the word strike comes from sailors. They struck their sails and refused to leave port here in the New World unless their demands were met. That's where the word strike actually originates. And there are other ways like it. And Adams is very well. He's talking about the Boston Massacre, it's on your sheet. And he says, look at these people. They're Negroes, they're mulattoes, they're ruffians, they're Irish tees, they're the refuse, the offal. And that's because most of the mass actions of the revolution are led by those people, including the Boston Massacre, the Tea Party, et cetera, and so forth. It's the lower orders who are kind of inspired, and it's the leadership of the Sons of Liberty who are trying to keep that under control. And the revolution releases those kinds of tensions for a while, which had been there anyway before the revolution, and cuts them short. And so too, most importantly, slavery will be protected at all costs. The revolution will never threaten slavery. Hence, the quote from Lord Dunmore, the royal governor, which, this is just self-interest, this is just tactically smart. He says any slave who joins the British Army is free. And Washington condemns him as a kind of, let's say, a violator of human rights. The irony is couldn't be richer. Because slavery is not to be endangered by those. So it's not a social, there's no social upheaval. Instead, there is this turmoil, which the Constitution, as a kind of thermidor, you know what I mean by thermidor? A kind of reaction accomplishes, because in the interim between the revolution's success and the adoption of the Constitution, roughly 7 or 8 years later, there's a tremendous turmoil, rebellions, tax rebellions, farmer rebellions. These are smallholders. It's this world of petty household, resenting the power of merchants, land speculators, the elites. You have Shays' Rebellion, which is the most famous, and there's a quote there about from a someone hostile to Shays' Rebellion. So these people are, they're the refuse of society. But the Constitution and the democratic, very democratic movements will take over whole states. They're not states, whatever they are, under the Federation. Occupy state houses, and elect whole legislatures which cancel debts, abolish various kinds of taxes. So this scare, and that's why the Constitutional Convention is called. That's why it's called, because there's turmoil all over the place. And elites, Hamilton, what they envision is a kind of commercial British republic, open trade, to finance, a kind of mini Britain. That's what Hamilton's view is. A kind of we'll make Great Britain happen here. It'll be prosperous, et cetera, and so forth. But we gotta control the so that the convention actually happens in secret. The doors are all closed. And it's hot. It's like really, really hot. But they kept the windows and doors closed because they didn't want word of what the deliberations were about to leak out until they were ready to reveal them. And then there's a great debate. And the Constitution is a near miss proposition. There's enormous opposition to the Constitution all around the country, and it almost loses. And it loses because there is that kind of politics of petty property, which senses a kind of threat to their interests. A few more, and I'm done. Just so this is gonna. Hopefully, all of this will. It should stay with us into the future. All right. Well, finally, at the first intimations of wage labor as a growing phenomenon here. I've mentioned the sailors. The first unions are formed among, especially the luxury trades, because they have greater leverage. Highly skilled, they have leverage in the market, right? Their skills are very valuable, carpenters, et cetera, and so forth. Begin to organize in the 1790s. You get that. And then you get the first early stages of industrialization. This is basically the textile industry. There are other forms of industry, but New England textile industry, which first employs overwhelmingly women and children. Children as young as 6. Really, young as 6. And women. And they're supposed to be very paternal. It's a kind of paternal capitalism. And you get the first sense that something new is happening. That's scary. That's appalling. And that is this world of powerless, propertyless, dependent wage laborers. I have no recourse. You want to read a great short story about this early, it's a paired short story. Melville's Paradise Bachelor's Tartarus of Maize. Tartarus of Maize is about a textile factory in the wilds of New England. And it's women, obviously. And it gives you a stunning picture of what that is like. So Melville is becoming, as is some of the people like they've had Emerson on the fan of Emerson, but where this you get the beginnings of a worry, fear. and you get utopian communities. Robert Owen found something called New Lanark in Indiana.
New Harmony.
New Harmony. New Lanark is in Scotland. Because the whole way of life that wage labor represents is terrifying. It turns people into cogs in a machine. Way before Charlie Chaplin makes fun of that, people are sensing this. There's something inhuman about this new system that places money before all else, and whose technology, however marvelous, and it is marvelous, it's marvelous, is also inhuman in what it does to the people who tend it. And so you get this, how do we escape that? Well, we be the new harmony, where there's cooperative labor, everybody owns things, a Brook Farm, which is a bunch of, pardon the expression, intellectuals who, they know it doesn't work very long, but Hawthorne needed quiet, right as stuff, so he left. In any event, you get these utopian experiments. Industry develops more and more in the antebellum North. It becomes a greater and greater work. They're organized, now they're real organized unions, mass demonstration, unions enter the political arena, form working parties, during the Jacksonian era, which is what it is, the Jacksonian era, this antebellum period, so society becomes conscious that something new is happening and has to be addressed. And among the people who do think that is Lincoln. And Lincoln, there's a couple of folks who've been there. Okay, we have wage labor. Looks like it's here. Okay, and that's a problem. Puts people in tendency, exploited, they can turn into almost inanimate objects, tending to machines. Look at Adam Smith. He's on your sheet saying nothing. It turns the worker into a stupefied being. Stupefied. It's horrible. Think to yourself, would anybody say that now about wage labor? Anyway, and we're going to talk about it. Lincoln says yes, but it's temporary. Because, and Jefferson had said this too, although he was less conscious, because we have all this land, and all you need to do is work with wage labor, you put aside some money out of the house, you put aside some money, and then you buy yourself a shop, or you buy yourself a land. Does that sound a little familiar, like you could have that conversation today? I think we could. Anyway, we'll talk about it later. He says it's a temporary condition. And Jefferson's Louisiana Purchase is all about creating an empire for liberty, by which he meant, and he thought it would go on for 1,000 generations. He really did. You get this land and you settle it, and everyone will be a petty producer, free, emancipated, self-reliant, and able to control his own affairs. And Lincoln believes that too. One big problem with that, for Lincoln, is suggesting the quoting, slavery. Because slavery has an insatiable appetite for new land. It's a highly wasteful form of commodity production, and it's constantly engorging new land, moving every west and south, they can across the border into Mexico and the Caribbean if you get away with it. And that is an enormous threat to that world of petty producers, of what used to be called free. There's a book, a very well-known book that was written by a historian who we will read later in the book, the last session, Eric Foner, called Free Labor, Free
Soil.
Free labor, free soil, free labor, free men. There's a connection, labor, soil, freedom, right there. And that's what this world felt. And the labor is embedded, free labor is embedded in that kind of way of reproducing your life. And slavery puts that in jeopardy. And I don't mean to say that's the cause. It is a cause of the Civil War. It's not the Civil War. I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to draw this connection to various kinds of labor questions, how they're being addressed. In any event, I'll finish now. The last point I want to make is the Civil War solves that question, that specific labor question. Slavery solves it, so it seems. And the labor question that follows, which is the one we're familiar with, even now, it's been so eclipsed, and Americans were familiar with it, agitated by for 75 years, will never forget, overlook the imprint of slavery. And it will call wage labor, wage slavery. And it does that because it means it, because its memory is fresh, and because and it will say that that kind of slavery cannot pass wage slavery. And so we have just lived through a civil war, and we're now going to live through a second civil war. And that brings us to the Gilded Age, which is where we're going to pick up 2 weeks from today, where my last quote, think about this for a second. Imagine someone saying this today. I know it's the last quote, maybe I didn't give it to him. George McNeil is the guy, the big deal, what we're going to talk about next week, the Knights of Labor. Unbelievably powerful labor organization for a brief period of time in the 1880s and 90s. He says at one point, he says, he who sells his labor sells himself. That formulation is hard to imagine because wage labor is so normal, so built into what we assume is a giving, a fate, the way it must be, that it suggests to me how far this narrative has to travel to get from George McNeil saying something like that and many other people who are troubling over go to work, better wage, better wage, like treated better, but the substructure is not in question. Okay, done. Questions? I mean, I don't know what time we have. No question? Yeah, in the back. Yeah.
Yeah, so you sort of glossed over this a little bit. Could you talk a little bit more about the rise of Jacksonian democracy and the working men's parties in parallel?
Yeah. Trying to think of what I should say that will keep us kind of on track.
Well, I guess the reason I ask is just because it's, to me, it seems like at that period of time, non-property men, white men, were enfranchised with the right to vote and flooded into the democratic process. The ruling elites thought this was going to be like a revolutionary moment where the masses, expropriated their wealth, and a current of that movement starts forming these working class parties. It's sort of in partnership with the nascent unions, but they're ultimately crushed by the two-party system. That theme, still dominates working class politics today.
Well done. Well, I'll add something to that, another angle. It's customary, I think, fairly customary, even on left-wing circles, to say, well, the bourgeois revolution, capitalist revolution, is synonymous with the democratic revolution. That capitalism invites democracy. There's certain truth to that in certain ways. But really, most democratic advances within bourgeois society, in America and in Europe, have been consequent to pressures from below. Because there's always this kind of fear, either residual or very active fear of where that might lead, where republicanism might lead. The egalitarianism that is sometimes built into republicanism can end up being a challenge to big property. In the case of Jacksonian America, one of the things that's interesting is that it is a movement to some degree propelled by working men's parties and this broader world of petty producers who want to. Working men's parties want to be. They want to end the conflict labor. They want the right to vote, and in some ways they succeed. We in America get the suffrage much earlier, that happens elsewhere. So they are in some ways successful. But they also want, see, in the 1830s, it's still a deferential society, and one that still carries with it the baggage of the old world. So there are a lot of enterprises in America are state incorporated. You have to get a franchise from the state. Who do you think gets those franchises? Only the most powerful interests to build a canal, to build a railroad, to build a highway, to open this kind of work or that kind of work. You get a franchise. A lot of the Jacksonian agitation is about busting that open, so no longer is the monopoly of elites. So you have anybody can incorporate and start a little business, and that's a kind of capitalist democracy or petty production, which also moves and which scares elites in Jacksonian America. And again, is part of this. You know, what we're dealing here with is a long period of, I would call it, ambiguity. Is the labor question about wage labor? Is it about labor and property? Is it about both? Where do these two kind of social movements conjoin? Where do they split apart? Can they be allies? Can they not? And this whole antebellum right through the 19th century will keep raising that question. What's the far horizon of that vision? Does it go beyond petty property? Is the cooperative commonwealth advocated by the populace and the Knights of Labor a step beyond a world of household petty? It has to be cooperative. But where is it going? No, it's okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
I'm not really sure how to ask this, but can you say a little bit more about, I think something that's hard for me to understand is the fact that the Knights of Labor are like saying it's about wage work, whereas like when I was taught about like slavery in school, it's like, oh, like how could they not look at literal enslaved people and be like, at least we're better off than them? Why was that like straight up militancy?
That's the main thing we're going to talk about in 2 weeks.
Okay, sweet.
That's the main thing. That is the question. Why did they feel their new condition so with such profound enmity that they saw it as slavery? And were they right? Were they right? And what had the model of slave society, which existed for 200 years, left them with thinking about, worrying about? Well, next week we're going to read stuff about the Knights of Labor and this whole period, because that's the core problem. The rest of yes.
I guess I'm curious about the relationship of labor in this period to currency and debt. So I think like Michael Parman has a thing about the Constitutional Convention being in part sparked by them trying to like stamp out movement for soft currency in like Rhode Island and stuff. And then like obviously at the turn of the next century, there's going to be like Littleton and stuff. Are there like, is like currency and debt like an active concern for labor in that middle period?
Well, for these people, labor is a funny term in it, but absolutely. Rhode Island is not the only state that issues paper currency to make it much easier for all these indebted farmers and others to pay off their debts. And the ruling elites of Rhode Island are very alarmed by this. Rhode Island is a very democratic state. It's controlled by these democratic movements. They pass these laws. They have a unicameral legislature elected every year. I mean, this is serious democracy. And debt and currency is a big part of that. Debt moratoria are passed in various, and the relief rebellion. Shea is only the most famous rebellion. This is by Massachusetts farmers who are deeply in debt. But there are rebellions in Virginia, in Maine, and Vermont, all during this interim period before the Constitution. And Shea's is right before the Constitutional Convention, 1786. The convention meets a year later in 1787. It's very alarming. It's not a quiet time. They wouldn't have convened it. And the thing is, they were convened to amend the Articles of Confederation. They had no intention of amending the Articles of Confederation. Most of the people who gathered there knew that they needed a new structure of government to kind of establish authority to establish a safe environment because they wanted to attract foreign investment for British particularly investors, so that they wouldn't have any of these people canceling debts all over the place. You're in Britain and you want not going to buy U.S. securities if you think they may not make good on their debts. So yeah. Yes, well, open the back, yeah. Sorry, I'm very bad at names, so I.
Ben.
So,
I guess I had a question for you and for everyone in the room about that last quote, and how it's different or the same than today, because he who sells labor sells himself. I mean, I guess, like, I actually do think people now, I mean, like, I think a very common thing is just like, I wanna have my own business. I mean,
yeah.
I wanna found a shop, or I wanna, found a restaurant or something. I mean, I think that is with the way society kind of channels people, alienation, with how odious it is to work for capitalists in our society. So to me, it seems like the Knights of Labor, even the name says this, actually they see more dignity in work, even working for other people. It isn't that we can claim it, we can fight back, get a bigger piece of it, and we have less of that now. So I mean, I'm just interested to know how people. I mean, some of that Jacksonian stuff about having your own farm gets channeled into having your own small business. I mean, until very recently, that's been like our entire political discourse has been about, middle class people.
Yeah, that's what I was being so coy about, intimating that it's still alive today. But anyway, comment. Respond to that. I agree. Yes.
What is the capitalist or the materialist reason why the North fought so hard against the South to end slavery, right? Because they slavery.
Yes. I apologize. That's a big.
Oh, is it like that big of a question?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
These are all big. That's the next course, which I'm not.
Introduction.
Right, yes.
I'm not sure if this is too big of a question, but I've heard about the poor laws in England.
Yeah.
One of the things that I liked about your framing about the American colonies as like a solution to the imperial labor question is that it descended the American exceptionalist narrative. So I think in America, maybe partly it's just because we don't learn that much about other countries or parts of the world, and I think that we're really special. But at the outset, like America is a part of this like global process, global labor question.
Exactly. But I think I completely agree.
So I've heard of the poor laws, but I don't know very much about them.
Oh.
I kind of gathered that they were.
Well, the poor laws are a way of controlling this population of masterless men, but by the way, they're by no means just men. There are plenty of women finding themselves in exactly that condition, and they scare these people. And so poor laws are established that either incarcerate people in workhouses, poorhouses, so that they're under surveillance and maybe they engage in public works or it's part of a prison sentence. Or their return to a kind of bondage under the poor laws. And there's relief, some legal relief provided by the poor laws. So they think because they're very worried about brigands roaming the country, and they are roaming the countryside, desperate for livelihood. A lot of these indentured servants write about their experiences before they come, and it's that they can't hold house and home together. They're desperate, and they're willing to resort to whatever people need to do to stay alive. So these poor laws begin in Elizabethan England and continue. Hobbes writes about them, and it's a chronic worry for at least 150, maybe more years on what to do. Sometimes it's less of a problem when the English economy picks up for a variety of reasons, and so there's more gainful employment for these people. But the real threat is that they're under nobody's direct, all the time social supervision. They don't, they have no master. That's not the way society, traditional society organizes. Yes, yes.
I guess I have a kind of big zoom out question, which struck me as we were talking, which is just what is the question in the labor question? I mean, I feel like I can hear, I'm not sure, and I'm curious for other folks' thoughts too. I mean, I feel like I hear very clearly a labor problem, right? Certain tensions, right, about who should labor, what kind of labor is permissible in society, right? How that labor should be distributed, whether it should be compensated in what ways.
So what's your problem?
But
No, I'm kidding. Those
Yeah.
are all, no, I'm kidding.
I mean, I guess I'm wondering, those all seem like questions, right? But the
they all-
labor question
Yes.
seems like a kind of more specific frame.
What other people think? That's good. How do you react? Yes,
I mean, I think you're talking about what is like the main labor question across, you know, whatever period of time you're gonna go over. So like, yeah, you can see it as a problem with like several questions, or you can see it as like, okay, what is the labor question right now? What is the prominent question?
yeah. I think what you're saying is right. It interrogates everything about society. It even interrogates sexual relations. It interrogates patriarchy. It interrogates religion. It interrogates political power. Who's got it? Where does it come from? How can it be? Is it fair? The labor question can be asked in a very moderate way. After all, trade unions are an answer to the labor. Okay, workers are exploited unfairly. Although Marx would argue they're not. They're just getting the exchange for their labor power, the cost of that, of other things about feminism. No, anyway, okay. But the labor movement would stop short and say, look, labor is being treated unfairly. And that's the question. The way to be treated fairly is to get a decent wage, security, wage, healthcare, etc. All the things we talk about now, they talk about there. And that's the labor question, and we solve it that way, by improving the terms of the labor market. The bigger labor question says there shouldn't be a labor market. As society organized that way will always be sick. It will produce dependency and exploitation, great big gulfs in wealth and power. It will exacerbate patriarchal relations. It will produce war because there's this kind of insatiable craving for profit that sets people at odds with each other. So it's that. It's not fairer. That is one answer. It should be fairer. That's an answer. But there's another answer which is no, the whole social design is.
Did you like someone saying that?
Did I?
Yeah, just now.
No. I said it. I think somebody said it before me, but that's how I'm responding to it, yes.
So there's not a single labor question. There are multiple labor questions.
Yeah. In other words, manufacturers recognize their version of labor. How do you, one way was this, they had a racial answer to a labor, not the way you think. They had this, it said, and not only just manufacturing, the ideologues, I mean, someone like John Locke, authored the Constitution, a model Constitution for South Carolina, which included slavery. Anyway, they yeah, I'm gonna stop. Thank you very much. I just, okay, we can do it anymore. I'm sorry. Tell me a question.
I was just asking, so there's not like a singular labor
Yeah,
question, like,
yeah.
different groups are articulating
Yeah, I was
what
just
is
saying-
wrong with labor in different contexts.
Ideologues, or manufacturers, here's the way, or racial. They say, John Adams says, the whole thing is, who's gonna win? For time immemorial, elites viewed those who work as inferior races. They really had a written on a modern, but a racial conception. And this continues. You know, Jeremy read you the name of the book I wrote. And it's called Mongrel Firebugs. Mongrel Firebugs is a phrase that newspaper editorialists, manufacturers, politicians in the 1870s and 80s, the great strikes all over the country, described their laborers as. They were Slavic wolves, they were mongrel firebugs, they were not black, they were just this lower order, this lower caste, and that's who works. And that's the labor question for them. We deal with them as a kind of inferior racial, and we deal with them violently because there's sometimes no other way to deal with them. That's why we build the Park Avenue Armory, which is why it was built. That's why we built the 168th Street Armory. No, Park Avenue Armory, I'm sure. So it can be manned by the sons of silk stocking folk, and they have Gatling guns at the apertures and make sure they can shoot down armed workers of the world as they come down with Park Avenue, demonstrating for their rights. So that's the thing of Slavic wolves, and a host of other racial epithets who describe who these people are. It's built in long time, long before this America, this is traditionalism. All right, I'm gonna.
So I think we have a couple of announcements. Union Power folks, do you want to? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm the Union Power chair. But basically I'm inviting you all to join Union Power. Because you're here, I'm going to assume there is a common interest between you and the campaign. But yeah, Union Power has two different components. Right now, we're really full force into supporting UPS Teamsters. This weekend, we'll actually be doing some tabling events in Queens, Manhattan, and Brooklyn on Saturday and Sunday. And then on Friday at 7:30, yep, there will be a UPS Teamsters rally at Foster Ave, UPS, where we will be doing turnout for. The Teamsters General President will also be speaking at the rally, so it's definitely a good event to come to. But I am going to plug in comms a little bit here. Comms is a really good opportunity if you're interested in political education. And a lot of people don't really make that connection. But some of the best comms content, like emails and social posts, are things that are informing people about like the things that we're talking about right now. So if you're a writer or if you like doing research over these types of things, comms definitely a good place for you. It's not just the graphic design and taking pictures. But yeah, if you have any questions, you can talk to me after today. Yeah.
I want to say thank you for the great discussion. It's a great question. I think it's going to be, I hope I'll see you all 2 weeks, but anyway, this is good.
Do you want to mention?
Oh, yeah. So also, if you look on the back of your sheets, there's some graphics, there's some of the events that Rebecca was just talking about. And then additionally, all the way on the right, we have DSA 101 coming up this Saturday at 1 o'clock. So if you're new, either to the chapter, like you just moved here, or maybe you're like DSA, or maybe you're new to socialism, this is a great opportunity to just come learn a little bit about the org and, you know, ask any questions you want, and there'll be some bagels. So come on Saturday at 1, and then there's also more upcoming events all the way on the right. You can just scan that and you'll see all the things we do, and we do so much, and we would love for you to be a part of it, to be able to have your input in these kind of events and so many more things. So please join if you are not a member. I forgot to write it on the sheet, but we did it in the permanent marker. So socialist.nyc.join.
And then the very last thing is just for future sessions of this, note because of the technology, it's if you want to get like a Zoom link or if you just want to have it on your calendar, there's like a separate sign up for each one. So please go to the labor question website, just sign up for the next session. The readings are there too, so you can have the readings for next time. Do you want to just remind us what the readings for 2 weeks from now are?
Next week, we're gonna read a chapter from a book of mine on this this Gilded Age period. There's an essay by a guy on Knights of Labor, and I'm trying to mix in documents with more present-day reading. So there's something about the race question in the Knights of Labor, and there's also the preamble of the Knights of Labor that appears documents.
Thanks everybody. Let's go out for drinks. It's my birthday, and thank you again to Steve for back.
Here. And then 2 strong people.